allow you the opportunity to share what it is you actually taught while you were in the classroom, and then what caused you to realize I'm ready to take that leap and be a instructional leader?
When I taught in middle school, I taught middle school science, 7th grade at the middle school. So, and that's what I taught all 5 years that I was at the middle school. What actually led me to take the leap into leadership was actually some of the leadership experiences that I had as a teacher. And I felt like I could affect more change outside of the classroom. When I applied to be an assistant principal, I really wanted to work in a middle school, and I did not get that opportunity. I was placed, of all places, in elementary school. Go figure.
You can't have the kindergartners. They found you.
Right. So God was telling me that I needed to learn how to work with little kids. My first day there was a little girl. She was so cute. I think she might have been in kindergarten. And, you know, me, I'm dressed with my heels and things on. And she comes and run up to me. Hi, principal lady. Hi, principal lady. And I'm like,
The little ones love to touch you, put their hands all over you, and all that stuff.
Exactly. And I look back at that and laugh. I was at that elementary school, I think, for about 5 or 6 years. So I really learned to love the students in middle school. But most of all, aside from the love that I had for the students, it gave me the opportunity to really see where the foundation of learning takes place in each grade level, and how hard the elementary school teachers work with our students, and how dedicated they are to their learning. It's elementary school it's just so, I think it's just so wonderful as far as the teachers really getting to know their students, because there are less students that they have to get to know. So, you know, the older students did change classes for math or English, but for the most part, they didn't have 200 students on their class roster.
Like a typical high school.
Like a typical high school, exactly.
Absolutely.
So I learned so much there instructionally at that elementary school level. I learned so much about kids at that elementary school level. And from there, I moved on to being a middle school principal, which was what I've always wanted to be. And that was very, very exciting. And again, I was able to see the big difference between the curriculum and what's really taught between elementary and middle school. And I got a chance to witness how those gaps really affect those educational gaps affect the students coming into middle school. And it's really difficult for some of the students to catch up. I think I was at middle school for maybe another 5 or so years. And I wanted to get an experience at high school so I could round out my leadership experience. And I moved on to a high school, and that's where I really fell in love with high school. And I don't know whether it's because I was getting older, but I could relate to the high school students very well. Instructionally, you see the rewards instructionally, because you get a chance to follow a student from 9th to 12th grade. So you finally see a finished product. But on the downside, what we really had to work on were the deficits, again, the deficits that the students didn't get from elementary school.
Right.
And when I first became a high school assistant principal,
Mm-hmm.
the focus wasn't on reading across the content area. The focus was, teaching your core content area.
Right.
So as a leader, we had to try to shift that culture of thinking from the teachers, that even if you taught science or you taught social studies, that reading piece was an important piece because many of our students were not on grade level there. So high school turned out to be my favorite. And I loved being an assistant principal. I had always said that I would retire being an assistant principal. I didn't want to go any further because I loved being an assistant principal.
Wow.
And now,
and now how that turned out for you?
Yeah, it didn't work, but I had and the whole reason I think that I even considered it is because I had a mentor that was in administration, and they gave me the opportunity. They, allowed me to say what my concerns were as far as being a principal, and to talk through those things, of reasons for not being an assistant, not being a principal. So it worked out. I have not regretted it. Yeah. I have sometimes regretted it. There are some days when I'm like, no, I quit. I just don't want to do this anymore. But for the most part, I do not regret it at all. It's very rewarding.
But you know what? I think anyone who's really worth their salt working in education probably has those days where you're like, oh my goodness, I'm not sure about this. And then you say, but I got to go because anyone who tells me that what they're doing every single day with education with kids is easy, they're not doing it right.
Exactly.
Something is wrong. If you come home and, oh, this is easy, this is whatever. I'm like, okay, I don't know what you're doing. But, Robin, it's been really great for Cortland and I to sit here and talk with you. And so I'm not going to put you on the spot, but, our show is called Village Talk for a reason. And so we're just so excited to have somebody with your level of experience and expertise. I mean, K through 12 and done so many positions in the school building. But since we're called Village Talk, we talk about what the village is talking about. And as we're recording this right now, our world, not just our country, but our world is having some things that they're talking about. There's some conversations that are going on that have needed to happen for a long time. And when I think about when it comes to racism in education or, even our own personal experiences, I mean, the three of us are African-American and grew up in generally the same kind of area. This conversation of racism is really hitting home, and each one of us, I'm curious, what, since you're from this area, what have either of you, have you had some experiences? What was your first taste of racism, as maybe as a child or even in the school system? Did this experience did you experience? I mean, I know you did. Just, do you remember what those experiences were?
I do remember, as I grew up in Southeast DC, the only white person I knew was my mom's boss, and my mom worked for the federal government. We moved to Prince George's County in '73, which was a majority white county then. And when I went to my elementary school in 5th grade, it was culture shock for me. Trying to fit in, and also feeling like you are being looked down upon because of the color of your skin. The students there weren't outwardly racist. I didn't have anyone call me the N-word, but you could feel the tension. When I moved on to middle school, again, the county was still predominantly white, but they used to have a group, a gang of white people, white kids, mainly white boys, and they were called the Grits. And we would always be afraid of walking alone because the Grits were against Black people, and they would go around and jump, mainly Black boys. They didn't really mess with girls, but jump out friends and things like that. So we were all very afraid of the Grits. And but going through middle school or junior high school at that time, that was pretty much, what we had to deal with. And I think most of the feeling, because again, I wasn't ever called the N-word during that time, but it was just a feeling because you were outnumbered.
Right.
And, the way they would exclude you from certain things.
Right. That's interesting because, like I said, the three of us, generally from this area, having very different experiences. And as I've shared with you before, I grew up right here in the county, and my experience was so different. I was the only African-American face in my classes, the majority of my classes growing up. And so if you look at my school pictures from 3rd, 4th, 5th, 6th, it's not hard to figure out who I am. So when you say being the one who was different in the class, and so I would love to say I hadn't been called the N-word, but I had on a regular basis, even as a child. And I think about how that impacted me at an early age. Now, my neighborhood that I grew up in was mostly African-American, but during that time with desegregation orders in the 70s, they sent us to neighborhoods that were less diverse, or not diverse at all, we'll say, and so that they could have some diversity in our schools. And to be able to be the one who did that, I remember very clearly the first day of school that I arrived, and the principal got on the bus and said, I need you guys to be on your best behavior in the school because many of us don't want you here anyway. And I will never forget that. But, as a 3rd grader at the time, I thought she was just giving advice. I didn't realize the sentiment of her statement because I was like, oh, I just better be good, because I was trying to get people to like me. And I think about how, think about all that's going on now. And, there is never a time where as an African-American, we can speak for every other African-American. But I think it's important that even in education, as educators, we share our stories, because I don't know if this generation really understands some of the things that even the generation ahead of them has experienced. Cortland, what about you?
So growing up in D.C., 16th and Hobart Street, Northwest, I had a friend who was Hispanic, Filipino, a Caucasian friend, as well as an African-American friend. And so I felt my childhood experience was always multicultural, especially in that community, which to this day is still that way. When I moved to Prince George's County in 1977, I remember my friends talking about the police and that they were racist, but I didn't understand what that meant because I had no interactions with the police. So my only, way to gauge what they were talking about was what I understood from the civil rights movement. I feel my childhood has been a direct beneficiary of the privilege of what people sacrificed, lived, and died for during the civil rights era, because I've only had one experience in my lifetime where someone used the N-word towards me, whereas I'm hearing you guys had a totally different experience. And I just happened to be walking down the street one day and a car's rolling by, a guy rolls down the window and then he says, hey, and he uses the N-word, he rolls his window back up. And in my mind, I'm thinking, what's going on with you that you feel like you need to do that? Obviously you're bored. But
that's nice. You said just bored.
Just bored, because like all I can say is in my mind, I've never felt less than or inferior or inadequate because of the color of my skin. Now, surely if I had experiences as you guys have talked about, I may feel differently. But it seems like to me, the only time where my skin color is made to be something where it's a topic of conversation is when racism is introduced into the matter. But throughout my childhood and growing up, going to school, I just felt I was a human being. I was a person. I recognize and understand the fact that I am Black